speak. I'm going to start talking as y'all are putting stuff down. We are dealing with Paul's third missionary journey. That's basically 54 to 58 AD. We talked about this last week. We started into the fact that he wrote 1 Corinthians from here, where he's in Ephesus. James was written in 44 AD. 50 AD is the Gospel of Mark. 54 is 1st and 2nd Thessalonians, which we've talked about. And now at 55 AD, he has written 1 Corinthians. We started into 1 Corinthians last week. Remember, what we're doing is we're doing a kind of a chronological of the whole New Testament. So Paul is the author. He's writing from Ephesus. It's his fourth year in Ephesus, about somewhere between 54 and 56 AD on his third missionary journey. He's written to the church at Corinth. He started this church. This is definitely the second letter, as it'll say on down as we get through it. On my first letter, I wrote to you something. And purpose Paul wrote for three reasons: to draw the church back together in a spirit of unity as one body of Christ, to deal with the moral laxity in the church, and to answer certain questions the church had requested to Paul. Now, as you notice in your sheets I passed out, as we say, this is his second letter, actually, he wrote. We lost the first letter. There were some oral reports and so about what's going on in the church, and some problems were sent to him and questions. And so he wrote 1 Corinthians from Ephesus. His second visit to Corinth, and then he hears that things aren't going too well, and he wrote 2 Corinthians, which we will deal with way in the future. Now, last week we looked at the greeting and the division in the church. What's happening in division in the church, with the outline that you have here, is that they have two different people. They have different people saying, well, I'm of Apollos, I'm of Peter, I'm of Paul, I like this preacher better than that preacher, blah, blah, blah. And so Paul writes to them and says 11 things that you need to do to make sure that you're okay. First off, don't center on the preacher, center on the cross. Secondly, he said, be humble people to realize you don't know everything. Secondly, he said, listen to sound preaching, whether it's coming from me or Paul or Peter or whoever. Understand, then he says, God reveals the wisdom to people. He says, understand there's stages in a man's spiritual life. Sometimes we're just babies and sometimes we're more mature. We need to make sure that we work toward maturity. He says, see who ministers really are. Ministers are just workers in the church. He says, renounce be careful how you build on the church. Renounce self-deception. Don't deceive yourself into believing that you know more than you do. Let God judge the ministers, and don't compare and judge ministers. And lastly, see and understand the Spirit of God ministers, how things are working out. Now we are starting in to the third phase there, the moral laxity in the church. And Paul says, I have received a report of scandalous sex within the church family. Wow. A kind that wouldn't be tolerated even outside the church. One of your men is sleeping with his stepmother, and you're so above it all that it doesn't even faze you. Shouldn't this break your heart? Shouldn't it bring you to your knees in tears? Shouldn't this person and his conduct be confronted and dealt with? I tell you what I will do. Even though I'm not there in person, consider me right there with you, because I can fully see what's going on. I'm telling you that this is wrong. You must not simply look the other way and hope it goes away on its own. Bring it out in the open and deal with it in the authority of Jesus, our Master. Assemble the community. I'll be present in spirit with you, and our Master Jesus will be present in power. Hold this man's conduct up to the public scrutiny. Let him defend it if he can. But if he can't, then out with him. It will be totally devastating to him. of course, and embarrassing to you, but better devastation and embarrassment than damnation. You want him on his feet and forgiven before the master on the day of judgment. What's the problem?
Man sleeping with his stepmother.
Why is that a problem?
Because it's his father's wife.
So what it does is it says you shouldn't do that. And he's breaking the commandments. And what does Paul say to do?
Confront it.
Confront it, yes.
Confront
Stand
it,
up to it. Call it out for what it is. We need to call out sin for what sin is. Sometimes we think, well, we can just tolerate sin. We can just live with it. It's just a little bit of sin. We've gotten more and more used to things. It's the way we do. Things that would just totally scare us to death. You know, when Psycho scared me, that shower scene, y'all remember what I'm talking about? Yet now, it doesn't even faze people. They have to see somebody's arm chopped off with a chainsaw. You know, we just get more, and we tolerate a little bit, and then it grows to more and more and more. It's like a song the McCammies used to sing. It's called Getting Used to the Dark. We're just getting used to living in the dark. And we get used to living in the dark. And they were, and they need to deal with it. Then he goes on to say that this moral laxity must do what you must do to handle it, what the church needs to do. You flip and callous arrogance on these things bothers me. You pass it off as a small thing, but it's anything but that. Yeast, too, is a small thing, but it works its way through a whole batch of bread dough pretty fast. So get rid of this yeast. Our true identity is flat and plain, not puffed up with the wrong kind of ingredient. The Messiah, our Passover lamb, has already been sacrificed for the Passover meal, and we are the unraised bread part of the feast. So let's live out our part in the feast, not as raised bread swollen with the yeast of evil, but a flat bread, simple, genuine, and unpretentious. I wrote you in my earlier letter, see, that's that other, you know, that's how he says, I have another letter, that you shouldn't make yourselves at home among the sexually promiscuous. I didn't mean that you should not have nothing to do at all to do with outsiders of that sort, or with crooks, whether blue or white collar, or with spiritual phonies for that matter. You'd have to leave the world entirely to do that, but I'm saying that you shouldn't act as if everything is just fine when a friend who claims to be a Christian is promiscuous and crooked, is flipped with God or rude to friends, gets drunk or becomes greedy or predatory. You can't just go along with this, treating it as acceptable behavior. I'm not responsible for what the outsiders do, but don't we have some responsibility for those within our community of believers? God decides on the outsiders, but we need to decide when our brothers and sisters are out of line, and if necessary, clean house. He's saying don't tolerate sin amongst us. Now, when was the last time you heard somebody called on the carpet for sin in church?
Never.
Okay?
I was gonna say, what would really happen if that happened now?
Yeah, well, how would that look like?
We don't have church discipline anymore. And it says when we do, we're supposed to take two to go talk
Yeah,
to
we're supposed to go talk to that person first, and if they don't, then we're supposed to, we go to talk to that person first if they've done something wrong to us. But this isn't somebody doing something wrong to me. This is somebody who is doing something wrong to the entire church because of the sex that they're having. You see, what Paul's point seems to be is that if we allow somebody in our church to have sin in their life, that they continue in. Now, I understand we're all going to sin, don't we? There's none perfect, no, not one. But the whole point is that they continue in it. They have no sign of trying to repent or change or do anything differently, then we are to deal with it. If we have to put them out of the church, put them out of the church. But that's sure not the way we act today, is it? Now, honestly, in the Methodist discipline, Of course, some of y'all aren't Methodist anymore, but, and it may be in the discipline of the other church. Y'all are Methodist, in the United Methodist discipline. It lists rules that pastors can be kicked out of the church for breaking certain moral code, but it also says laity can be kicked out of the church for breaking certain moral code. If a pastor were to go and have an affair with the pianist, for instance, they would be kicked out of the church. They would have their ordination removed from them. That's happened in our conference several times. I mean, maybe not a pianist, but anyway. But we don't do it with the laity, but it actually says both are responsible for living their Christian life. But we only do it with pastors, hold them to a higher standard. So we need to think about that.
And there should be, because they're teachers and leaders.
They are the leaders that we have. Then Paul kind of takes a sidestep, it seems. And how dare you take each other to court? When you think you have been wronged, does it make any sense to go before a court that knows nothing of God's way instead of a family of Christians? The day is coming when the world is going to stand before a jury made up of followers of Jesus. If someday you're going to rule the world's fate, wouldn't it be a good idea to practice on some of those smaller ones' cases? Why, you're even going to judge angels. So why not these everyday affairs? As these disagreements and wrongs surface, why would you ever entrust them to the judgment of the people who don't trust in any other way? I say this as bluntly as I can to wake you up to the stupidity of what you're doing. Is it possible that there isn't one level-headed person among you who can make fair decisions when disagreements and disputes come up? I don't believe it. And here you are taking each other to court before people who don't even believe in God. How can they render justice if you don't believe in the God of justice? These court cases are an ugly and blot on your community. Wouldn't it be far better to just take it? Or let yourselves be wronged and forget it? All you're doing is providing fuel for more wrong and more injustice, bringing more hurt to the people of our own spiritual family. Paul is saying here, he seemed to be saying you don't even need to go to court. And he's giving you 4 reasons. First off, why would we expect a secular court that in many times is anti-Christian to make Christian state decisions about things? Secondly, Christians are going to judge the whole world. If we're going to judge the whole world, can't we judge these little things? And thirdly, he's saying there's absolutely no one. Are you saying there's absolutely no one in your church that is good enough to make a fair decision? I mean, if you think about those 3 things, then the answer has to be, well, yeah, I guess we ought to deal with them in church. But how many times do we sue our brother over almost any little thing these days?
Landline disputes.
Landline, not just landline. Well, you got landline disputes. You've got, he looked at me the wrong way almost. I mean, think of all these frivolous little lawsuits. You know, somebody said, can you sue somebody over that? He says, you can sue somebody over anything.
You may not win.
You may not win, but you can sue them.
But this is something that modern people don't even know this in the Bible in many cases. It's
But I mean,
something you don't hear anything about.
But you hear what they're saying here is settle it amongst yourselves. Deal with it in your church. I mean, do you mean there's nobody smart enough to make some kind of good decision on this? After all, we're going to judge the whole world. Shouldn't we be practicing? Paul says. But you know, there's whole sections of this, what Paul writes, that people don't practice in our church anymore. I mean, here's another thing. You know, first we had calling people on the carpet for having sin in their life that they're not trying to get rid of. Then we talk about, then he talks about here about court cases. You know, there's a lot in Paul that we need to think about and listen to. And then he goes back. Don't you realize this is not the way to live? Unjust people who don't care about God will not be joining in his kingdom. Those who use and abuse each other, use and abuse sex, use and abuse the earth and everything in it, don't qualify as citizens in God's kingdom. A number of you know from experience that I'm talking about. For not so long ago, you were in that list. Since then, you've been cleaned up and given a fresh start by Jesus, our Master, our Messiah, and by our God present in us and His Spirit. Then he goes on to talk about, again, the case of indulgence in the human body. Just because something is technically legal doesn't mean it's spiritually appropriate. I've said that many times. There are a lot of things in this world that are legal that Christians shouldn't be doing. I mean, it's just the way it is. If I went around doing whatever I thought I could get by with, I'd be a slave to my whims. You know the old saying, first you eat to live and then you live to eat. Oh, come on, Paul, don't be messing with me. Well, it may be true that the body is only a temporary thing, but it's no excuse for stuffing your body with food and indulging in it with sex. Since the Master honors you with a body, honor him with your body. God honored the Master's body by raising it from the grave. He'll treat yours with the same resurrection power. Until that time, remember that your bodies are created with the same dignity as the Master's body. You wouldn't make the Master's body off to a whorehouse, would you? I should hope not. There's more to sex than mere skin on skin. Sex is as much spiritual mystery as physical fact. As written in Scripture, the two become one. Since you want to become spiritually one with your Master, you must not pursue the kind of sex that avoids commitment and intimacy, leaving us more lonely than ever, the kind of sex that can never become one. There is a sense in which sexual sins are different from all others. In sexual sin, we violate the sacredness of our own bodies. These bodies that were made for God-given and God-molded love, for becoming one with another. Or didn't you realize that your body is a sacred place, the place of the Holy Spirit? Don't you see that you can't live however you please, squandering what God paid such a high price for? The physical part of you is not some piece of property belonging to the spiritual part of you. God owns the whole works, so let people see God in and through your body. Paul is here dealing with a couple of things. He is saying that there was a group within the church at this time that was saying, look, we're spiritual beings. And since we're spiritual beings that have a physical body, it really doesn't matter what your physical body does. Your physical body can go out and get drunk. Your physical body can go have sex with any woman you want to. Your physical body can do anything you want to because you're really a spiritual being, and what happens in the physical body doesn't really matter. But Paul is saying it does matter. It matters importantly. And sexual sin, as he says, is a different kind of thing than almost any other because it joins two together. We've just gotten into casual sex. One night stands. We see it all the time on TV and everywhere else. And it's just become a part of our society, unfortunately. And Paul says that's wrong. The Bible says it's wrong to do that.
Because it breaks up marriages and that causes a spiritual separation.
It breaks up marriages, and there is evidence that the first person you have sex with, some evidence that person has you've been imprinted on that person to the extent that you're always looking for the same thing in the next person. And you won't ever be satisfied until you find it. There's been some psychological tests to that matter. And so, that's what Paul's saying right here. It makes you one. But if all it does is you came together and then you left, a part of you's been ripped out to some extent. Then he goes up. Now he gets down to the second section, the last section of this. And it's questions that they asked him. Now we have a real problem here. we don't have the questions. All we have is the answers. And sometimes we can't interpret the answers because we don't know what the question was. And we'll talk about that in several different places here. But realize the biggest difficulty in interpreting this section is they seem to have written him a list of questions. And he's answering those questions, but we don't have those questions. Now getting down to the questions you ask in the letter to me. First, is it a good thing to have sexual relations? Remember, not only within a certain context, it's good for a man to have a wife and for a woman to have a husband. Sexual drives are strong, but marriage is strong enough to contain them and provide for a balanced and fulfilling sexual life in a world of sexual disorder. Marriage bed must be a place of mutuality, the husband seeking to satisfy his wife and the wife seeking to satisfy her husband. Marriage is not a place to stand up for your rights. Marriage is a decision to serve other, whether in bed or out. Abstaining from sex is permissible for a period of time if you both agree to it and if it's for the purpose of prayer and fasting, but only for such times. Then come back together again. Satan has an ingenious way of tempting us when we least expect it. I'm not understanding commanding these periods of abstinence, only providing my best counsel if you should choose them. Sometimes I wish everyone was single like me. A simpler life in many ways, but celibacy is not for everyone any more than marriage is. God gives the gift of the single life to some and the gift of the married life to others. Now, part of Paul's reasoning here and through this section is that in the back of his mind and every Christian of this time period, Jesus is coming in my lifetime. They really believe that Jesus was coming within the lifetime, within the first century. He's coming back. And obviously, it didn't happen. But he's thinking, well, if he's coming back, why should I get married? I mean, why should we get married? I do, though, tell the unmarried and widows that singleness might well be the best thing for them, as it has been for me. If they can't manage their desires and emotions, they should by all means go ahead and get married. The difficulties of marriage are preferable by far to a sexually tortured life as a single. And if you're married, stay married. This is the master's command, not mine. If a wife should leave her husband, she must either remain single or else come back and make things right with him. And a husband has no right to get rid of his wife. For the rest of you who are in mixed marriages, Christian married to non-Christian, you have no explicit command for the master. So this is what you must do. If you are a man with a wife who is not believed, but who still wants to live with him, if you're a man with a wife who is not a believer, but who still wants to live with him, hold on to her. If you're a woman with a husband who is not a believer, but he still wants to live with you, hold on to him. The unbelieving husband shares to an extent the holiness of his wife, and the unbelieving wife is likewise touched by the holiness of her husband. Otherwise, your children would be left out as it is. They also are included in the spiritual purpose of God. On the other hand, if the unbelieving spouse walks out, you've got to let him or her go. You don't have to hold on desperately. God has called us to make the best of it as peacefully as we can. You never know, wife, the way you handle this might bring your husband back to you. And don't be wishing you were someplace else or with someone else. Where you are right now is God's place for you. Live and obey and love and believe right there. God, not your marital status, defines your life. Don't think I'm being harder on you than on the others. I give the same counsel in all churches. Were you Jewish at the time God called you? Don't try to remove the evidence. Were you non-Jewish at the time you called? Don't become a Jew. Being Jewish isn't the point. The really important thing is obeying God, calling God's calling, following his commands. So God says, realize that, where you're at is where God wants you to be. When he says remove the evidence, they actually had surgeries at that time that could reverse, that would reverse circumcision. So you didn't stand out. They practiced, they did all their sports and in the nude, they did all the bathing in the nude. So Jewish boys stood out from Roman boys. And so if you didn't want to stand out, you could do it. But he said, just be who you are. Stay where you were when God called your name. Were you a slave? Slavery is no roadblock to obeying and believing. I don't mean you're stuck and can't leave. If you have a chance at freedom, go ahead and take it. I'm simply trying to point out that under your new master, you're going to experience a marvelous freedom you'd never have dreamed of. On the other hand, if you were free when Christ called you, you'll experience a delightful enslavement to God that you would never have dreamed of. All of you, slave and free both, were once held hostage to sinful society. Then a huge sum was paid out for your ransom. So please don't, out of an old habit, slip back into being or doing whatever someone else tells you. Friends, stay where you are called to be. God is there. Hold the high ground with him at your side. Basically just saying, look, your master is God. Not your slave master, not the person you work for, not the people in the church. Your master is God, and all you have to do is please him. It's really freeing when you start to really realize that. As a pastor, I could have tried to please every person in the church. And you know what? I'd have never done it. There's always different expectations. There's always different things that people want. All I have to do is please God. And if the rest of them don't like me, tough. That's the way it is. And that's the way it is for all of us Christians. We just need to praise God. And you can do that whether you're a slave or whether you're free. He's not saying we need to all be slaves. We all will be slaves to Jesus Christ. But physically, he's not standing up for slavery. He's just saying, no, it can't keep you from being what God wants you to be. Then it says, the master did not give explicit direction regarding virgins. He's asking probably another question now. What would she do with virgins and widows? Should they remarry or not? But as one much experienced in the mercy of the master and loyal to him in all the ways, you can trust my counsel. He didn't say God told him this. He said, this is my thoughts. Because of the current pressure on us from all sides, I think it would probably be best to stay just as you are. Are you married? Stay married. You unmarried? Don't get married. But there's certainly no sin in getting married, whether you're a virgin or not. All I'm saying is that when you marry, take an additional stress in an already stressful time, and you want to spare you if possible. I do want to point out, friends, that time is of the essence. There's no time to waste. So don't complicate your lives unnecessarily. Keep it simple. In marriage, grief, joy, whatever. Even in ordinary things, your daily routines of shopping and so on, deal as sparingly as possible with the things of this world thrust on you. This world, as you see it, is on its way out. I want you to live as free in complications as possible. When you're unmarried, you're free to concentrate on simply pleasing the master. Marriage involves you in all the nuts and bolts of domestic life and in wanting to please your spouse, leading to so many more demands on your attention. The time and energy that married people spend on caring for and nurturing each other, the unmarried can spend on becoming whole and holy instruments of God. I'm trying to be helpful and make it as easy as possible for you, not make things harder. All I want is for you to be able to develop a way of life in which you can spend plenty of time together with the master without the lack of directions. If a man has a woman friend to whom he is loyal but never intended to marry, having decided to serve God as a single and then changes his mind deciding he'd marry her, he should go ahead and marry. It's no sin. It's not even a step down from celibacy. as some say. On the other hand, if a man is comfortable in his decision for a single life in service to God and is entirely his own conviction and not imposed on him by others, he ought to stick with it. Marriage is spirituality and moral right, and not inferior to singleness in any way, although, as I indicated earlier, because of the times we live in, I do have pastoral reasons for encouraging singleness. A wife must stay with her husband as long as he lives. If he dies, she is free to marry anyone she chooses. She will, of course, want to marry a believer and have a blessing of the master. By now you know that I think she'll be better off staying single. The master, in my opinion, thinks so too. Paul has spent a whole lot of time saying, you know, it's so much less complicated staying single than being married. Would y'all agree with it?
Yes.
I mean, he said it over and over and over again. Marriage creates so much. All of a sudden, I mean, you have to please I have to please Deborah. I really do. Not just God, because the problem is we have chosen to have a relationship with each other that we have to deal with. Now, hopefully we're on the same page and working on the same purpose, but it just does complicate a lot of things. Robin knows, I mean, her husband just got sick, and how complicated has that made your life all of a sudden?
I can handle those kind of things better than most people can, and that does not pat me on the back.
I understand, but
But
I'm
there are
just
other
saying, but it
things.
just
There are
kind
other things.
but it does complicate life.
It certainly does.
I mean, you could have just, if you were
Other things come
single,
along with that.
There you go.
I mean, huh?
There are
other
other
things
things
come
that come
along with
along with
that.
that.
Yeah, I mean, but I'm
Just
just
saying.
saying is that singleness,
You're right, yeah, singleness
and
is-
it's Paul's thing, but Paul, I mean, he keeps going back and forth and says, it's okay to get married, but I sure wish you'd stay single. It's okay to get married, but I sure think you really want to stay single. I mean, you get that message here?
Yeah.
That last sentence
You miss
is
out on someone. I think about the people that are single,
I think so too.
that have never have a happy marriage.
That is
And the
true. You know,
love,
like,
you know.
I understand there are advantages to it and there are disadvantages to it.
Right.
But it's just
Rick
kind
was
of,
single, he never married, and somebody was talking to him one day, he said, well, he said, finding a good woman to marry is like finding a good parking place at Walmart. They've all been taken.
Well, it depends on what he's looking for.
Yeah, that's right.
I mean, but you know, and then having children, you know, Deborah and I have never had children. That allowed us to do a lot of traveling. If we'd had children, we'd have so much more expenses and everything else like that, that we probably wouldn't have been able to do all the traveling we did. We had exchange students, we send them home after a year or less. But
Less.
I mean, we had one that didn't work out very well. But truth is, I still have good relationships with most of them. You know, I hear from them regularly on emails and what's going on in their lives and all and everything. But in terms of having children of our own, we haven't. So that frees up a lot of finances that others would not. Huh?
It's a little late now.
Yeah, it is. It's been a little late for a while. But I'm just saying is, everything you bring into your life, you need to think about how complicating it's going to make. For instance, if I go out and buy a bass boat, and I'm going to spend $12,000, $13,000 on a bass boat or more, I'm going to have to use that thing. I mean, right? To justify buying it. And if I'm going to use that thing, that's going to take up time that I could have spent on something else. So we need to, you go out and buy a motorhome. You got to go, you know, it's tens of thousands of dollars. You got to go use it, or you've wasted your money, right? So I think we need to be careful in thinking about things we buy, because they not only take a commitment of finances, they take a commitment of time on down the line to keep up and to do. And so I think that we need to understand. So complicating life can be a problem, he says.
That last sentence, the master, I think so, I believe,
His
thinks so
opinion.
too.
Huh?
How does he know what Jesus thinks about it?
Well, because I guess he talks to him. But again, like I say, this was Paul's opinion. He told you that from the start. He told you all the way through. And he says, yeah, but I think God said it too. I think God would agree.
He's expressing an opinion there.
Yes. Now, the second question is coming up. The question keeps coming up regarding meat that has been offered up to an idol. Should you attend meals where such meat is served or not? Okay, here's the question. Here's what's going on. Food is meat in particular, offerings are regularly brought to pagan temples. Part of that is offered. But so many thousands of offerings come in, the temples usually sell that at a very reduced price. So you could go buy that ribeye steak down at Greenleaf's for $10 a pound, or you could go down to the local temple and buy it for $1 a pound. So when they had meals, oftentimes people would go and buy the cheaper meat, even though, and it's usually prime meat because it's a prime animal that has been sacrificed. That's the problem. Also, back in that time, we have unions today. They had guilds. So a carpenter would be in the carpenter guild in that time. And they would have meetings, and you'd have to go to that meeting and be a part of that guild in order to do that job, or people wouldn't come to you if you're not part of it. A scribes guild or lawyers guild or whatever you want to call it that they had. So when you go to those meetings, oftentimes that meat may be having been offered to an idol. The problem comes up is this. Does that mean you're participating in a pagan service or not? Because you're eating food that has been offered to an idol. And Paul's going to make the argument, as we read through here, as you listen, that idols are nothing. So whether if I offered it to this chair, it'd be the same thing. It's nothing. So therefore, who cares what it was offered to? But if your host makes a point of saying, hey, this was offered to an idol, what do you think about that, Christian? Then he says you probably shouldn't eat it. Why? Because the host is making a big deal out of it, and you don't want to appear to be doing a pagan thing. Now, there's nothing wrong with it from your perspective, but your freedom may be limited, liberty may be limited by what others think and are seeing. For instance, if I'm among an AA group today, I would not have brought in a bottle of wine to drink. Now, I could drink it, there would have been no problem. With me, I'm not an alcoholic. I actually don't even like the taste of alcohol personally. I don't even like it when it's used for cooking, and I know you burn off the alcohol. I don't like the taste of wine or beer or anything like that. It just doesn't attract me at all. But I could drink it, and it's no big deal for me one way or the other, but it would be for y'all. Because you'd say, hey, the preacher's drinking. Maybe it's okay if I take a drink occasionally. And pretty soon you're back on your alcoholic binge again, right? So he says, in order to not tempt other people, maybe you need to watch your freedom. But then the question comes up is how much do we need to watch it? For instance, there are people that, Baptists, don't believe in dancing. So should we not go to dances, not have dances at Methodist churches because of it? Or is it okay to have a dance at a Methodist church?
Yeah, the Baptists are not going to come anyway, right?
Well, they're not going to come, but, those Methodists down there are doing sinful things. So how far do we go hampering our freedom?
Just don't go to the country music house.
But how far do we go to hampering our freedom when the problem is their problem? And that's what Paul's going to talk about. So let's read some of this. We sometimes tend to think we know all we need to know to answer these kinds of questions, but sometimes our humble hearts can help us more than our proud minds. We never really know enough until we recognize that God alone knows it all. Some people say, quite rightly, that idols have no actual existence, that there's nothing to them, that there's no God other than our one God, that no matter how many of those so-called gods are named and worshiped, they still don't add up to anything but a tall story. They say again, quite rightly, that there is only one God the Father, that everything comes from him, and that he wants us to live with him. Also, they say that there's only one Master, Jesus the Messiah, and that everything is for his sake, including us. Yes, it is true. In strict logic, then, nothing happened to the meat when it was offered to an idol. It's just like any other meat. I know that, and you know that. But nothing isn't everything. But knowing isn't everything. If it is becoming everything, some people end up as know-it-alls who treat others as know-nothings. Real knowledge isn't that insensitive. We need to be sensitive to the fact that we're not all at the same level of understanding in this. Some of you have spent your entire lives eating idol meat and are sure that there's nothing bad in the meat that then becomes something bad inside you. An imagination and conscience shaped under those conditions isn't going to change overnight. Oh, I read it again. I read it wrong. And are sure that there's something bad, not nothing bad, something bad in the meat that then becomes something bad inside you. An imagination and conscience shaped under those conditions isn't going to change overnight. But fortunately, God doesn't grade us on our diet. We're neither commended when we clean our plate or reprimanded when we can't stomach it. Wow, I thought Mama said I had to clean my plate. But God does care when you use your freedom carelessly in a way that leaves a fellow believer still vulnerable to those old associations to be thrown off track. For instance, say you flaunt your freedom by going to a banquet thrown in honor of idols where the main course is meat sacrificed to idols. Remember now, they don't eat meat very often, so meat is something special. Isn't there great danger if someone's still struggling over this issue, someone who looks up to you as knowledgeable and mature sees you go into the banquet? The danger is that he'll become terribly confused, maybe even to the point of getting mixed up himself in what his conscience tells him is wrong. Christ gave up his life for that person. Wouldn't you at least be willing to give up going to dinner for him? Because, as you say, it doesn't really make any difference. But it does make a difference if you hurt your friend terribly, risking the eternal ruin. When you hurt your friend, you hurt Christ. A free meal here and there isn't worth it at the cost of even one of these weak ones. So never go to those idol-tainted meals if there's any chance it'll trip up one of your brothers or sisters. And don't tell me that you have no authority to write like this. I'm perfectly free to do this. Isn't that obvious? Haven't I been given a job to do? Wasn't I commissioned to this work in a face-to-face meeting with Jesus, our Master? I'm not sure. I guess he's talking about when he ran into him on the road to Damascus. We don't know of any other face-to-face meeting. Aren't you yourselves proof of the good works that I've done for the Master? Even if no one else admits the authority of my commission, you can't deny it. Why, my work with you is living proof of my authority. I'm not shy in standing up for my critics. We who are on missionary assignments for God have a right to decent accommodations, and we have a right to support for us and our families. We don't even, you don't seem to have raised questions with other apostles and other master brothers and Peter in these matters. So why me? Is it just Barnabas and I have to go it alone and pay our own way? Are soldiers self-employed? Are gardeners forbidden to eat vegetables from their own gardens? Don't milkmaids get to drink their fill of the pail? He's off on another thing now about the rights of ministers. It seems to be a side issue. Somebody must have said something about, well, how come we don't have to pay for you or something like that. I'm not just sounding off because I'm irritated. This is all written in the scripture's law. Moses wrote, don't muzzle the ox to keep it from eating the grain when it's threshing. Do you think Moses' primary concern was the care of farm animals? Don't you think his concern extends to us? Of course. Farmers plow and thresh expecting something when the crop comes in. So if we have planted spiritual seeds among you, is it out of line to expect a meal or two from you? Others demand plenty from you in these ways. Don't we have never demanded, don't we who have never demanded deserve even more? But you're not going to start demanding now what we've always had a perfect right to. Our decision all along has been to put up with anything rather than to get in the way or distract from the message of Christ. All I'm concerned with right now is that you not use your decision to make advantage of others, depriving them of what is rightly theirs. You know, don't you, that it's always been taken for granted that those who work in the temple live off the proceeds of the temple, and those who offer sacrifices at the altar eat their meals from what has been sacrificed. Along the same lines, the Master directed that those who spread the message be supported by those who believe in the message. It seems like Paul, I don't know, Paul almost seems here to me to be looking back and saying, oh, they kept saying, I'm for Peter, I'm for Paul, because Peter we had to pay more, Paul gave it for free, and Paul saying, oh, yeah, I could have gotten, he seems to have gone back to that old argument again to me. He says, I still want to make clear that I've never gotten anything out of this for myself and that I'm not writing now to get something. I'd rather die than give anyone ammunition to discredit me or impugn my motives. If I proclaim the message, it's not to get something out of it for myself. I'm compelled to do it and doomed if I don't. If this was my own idea of just another way to make a living, I'd expect some pay. But since it's not my idea, but something solemnly entrusted to me, why would I expect to get paid? So am I getting anything out of it? Yes. As a matter of fact, the pleasure of proclaiming the message at no cost to you. You don't even have to pay my expenses. Even though I am free of the demands and expectations of everyone, I have voluntarily become a servant to any and all in order to reach a wide range of people, religious, non-religious, meticulous, moralists, loose-living immoralists, the defeated, the demoralized, whoever I didn't take on their way of life. I kept my bearing in Christ, but I entered their world and tried to experience things from their point of view. I've become just about every sort of servant there is in my attempt to lead those I meet into God-saved life. I did all that because of the message. I didn't just want to talk about it, I wanted to be in on it. Now, yes.
This is like the dumb junior high girl question. But when you were talking about Peter paying Peter and have y'all never heard that? Rob Peter to pay Paul?
Yeah.
Yeah.
What is that? I mean, is that where that comes from?
I mean, it may be. I think of that in more like bills.
Yeah, but I mean, I've wondered, with Peter and Paul, if that had, like so many things, flying the ointment, that kind of thing from Solomon. I just wondered. That was stupid. But
I've never heard of it come from that, although it did say robbing Peter, paying Peter and robbing Paul or whatever. But I don't know. It didn't really say that in here anywhere. Paul just saying that, look, I had a right to be paid too, and I didn't demand it.
But it just sounds like it must have come from the Bible, doesn't it, Ron?
That was just a fleeting.
It might
That one verse, somebody picked it up.
Yeah, they might have thought of it in those terms.
Yeah.
In that thing.
Maybe they only thought, well, you only work one day a week.
Well, yeah. I mean, why would I work more than that? I'm going to quit right here. I mean, we've still got about 9 more minutes, but I think we're going to stop here so we don't get into anything new. We've got a whole lot more of 1 Corinthians, and we got to deal with spiritual gifts and all sorts of things going on. Does anybody have any questions, comments, statements, or opinions?